Here we are back again. We do have Jason from the Middlebury Institute, I noticed, is on the call too. I got to go down and visit with him a little bit last week. They've been driving this conversation at the national level and obviously have been making a lot of progress. At the front of our mind right now in terms of the federal policy advocacy is their Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. It hits pretty much checks all of the boxes for what we're looking for, particularly in terms of a balanced approach to offshore wind energy with ecosystem protections, resilience. It's really lovely, comprehensive legislation that provides for this balance of societal values, climate change as quickly, response to climate change as quickly as we can, not just through the energy sector, but also equally with protection of our ecological resources.
Shannon, could you present that as a slideshow? It's kind of hard to read just with the way you've got it displayed right now.
I will try to do that again and see if it comes up with the right share.
Thank you, that's better.
Is that better? Okay. Now if I can get that out of the way. So looking at the Pacific Northwest, really those are our priorities when we're engaging with our federal legislators. That Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act, also a lot of interest in Western grid modeling and transmission planning through our national labs. BOEM has been funding some amazing work that the labs have been doing on the West Coast, specifically around offshore wind, and we'd like to see that applied to all elements of our Western grid planning. Talked a little bit in the chatter up front about this low frequency, high consequence event inclusion in our resource adequacy and planning. There's a focus from the US Department of Energy that was driven by the Biden administration for fence line community engagement. And we see that ocean is really well poised to help provide that. And we've got this coexistence by design, these opportunities for offshore wind planning that will be the focus of our future presentation today. Some context for the urgency or where offshore wind and clean energy for the coast fits in. The Northwest Power Plan is a plan that is updated every 5 years, and it's scheduled to be published this year. They've pushed out the final release of that, but right now staff is going through a series of workshops with the commissioners and the public engaged with their draft findings and plan. This is not a binding plan, but it certainly is a plan that, at least historically, has been picked up by state and regional policy makers and other planners as a strong indicator and signal for where they should be headed. Last week, actually, there's one of the council meetings is occurring right now. Last week, there were some nice big aha moments for everyone. Here's an interesting slide. This is showing that based on what their planning scenarios are, we're going to need roughly 200 gigawatts of new resources for the West Coast grid by 2028. To put that into context, as of 2020, we only have 270 gigawatts. This is a massive, massive development of unprecedented scale. As we continue to move forward into the future, we see that specifically in the Pacific Northwest, driven by our population growth, our electrification of the transportation sector, and the realization of the many values of renewable hydrogen, both in decarbonization of long-haul transportation and maritime, as well as its uses for industrial and heating, is driving an even bigger development in clean electricity needs for the Northwest. At the same time, we have another voluntary engagement that is going on in terms of resource adequacy. This map is showing you the Northwest Power Pool. This color here, that's all the same, is currently the footprint of the utilities that are voluntarily participating in the Northwest Power Pool as a means of complying with federal regulations that they demonstrate that they can meet resource adequacy with some reserves. These states down here, Arizona and New Mexico, are interested in joining this conversation. Reliability is the focus of the Northwest Power Plan. So we're flipping back to that objective that we have here, that reliability include low frequency, high consequence events in their modeling and planning. Each of those different participants that's currently voluntarily participating in the power pool has been doing its own resource adequacy. So they're not really aligned. A lot of them aren't even using the same metrics. But what they do all agree in is that we have right before us an imminent resource inadequacy. So where does Oregon's coastal energy fit into this regional energy discussion? Oregon is an energy importer. Almost all of our electricity comes from outside of our state. Almost half of that is from non-renewable generation capacity that needs to be retired due to our states on the West Coast renewable portfolio or clean energy standards. Specific to the Oregon coast, all of our electricity comes through long extension cord transmission lines that are currently constrained through catastrophe-prone routes. And we are prone to a lot of catastrophes. BOEM has a task force in Oregon that has been looking specifically at floating offshore wind and those resources that we have. Floating offshore wind is a different technology than what we're seeing most immediately deployed on the East Coast, which is fixed float. It's closer to shore, stands on the bottom. These can be placed deeper offshore, and they can be located so that we can minimize our conflicts with shipping, fishing, and view sheds. BOEM is in the middle of their process. They've been working on their state planning, and right now they're looking for public to give them feedback on the tools that they're using for that planning, specifically to locate where potential call areas would be located off of our coast in preparation for releasing those call areas for the development community to entertain lease auctions on. That will be sometime in early 22, late 21, we're not sure, but the BOEM website keeps you all up to date with that and lets you know how you can participate. So both BOEM and DLCD are actively soliciting your participation in how they are mapping out these call areas. These are just a couple of screenshots that I took off of the tool that they have developed, which is pretty massive and impressive and awesome. Has a lot of valuable information there, and you can set your filters however you want to. So this is the time if you would like to see what's out there and make sure that the data that you believe that should be included in this is, please do so and let them know. Both DLCD and BOEM have been really responsive. We have this opportunity in Oregon that we learned about just last year, which is that our existing transmission within our state can accommodate somewhere between 2 and 3 gigawatts of floating offshore wind. Previously, we thought no offshore wind would be developed off of Oregon until it was exported to other states. We also learned that our offshore wind resource is a really beautiful complement to all of the energy loads, those demands that we have in the Pacific Northwest and the greater grid, Western grid, as well as to the other resources that we have online or we have in the pipeline to come online. So today, Oregon sits in our regional energy market, and our ratepayers send their dollars outside to pay for resources that are developed in other states. And those electrons are imported through our transmission system that's very clogged to meet our needs. Oregon's offshore wind opportunity is tremendous when we look at it in this context, because it allows us to produce energy off of our own coastline that our ratepayers can invest in. It also, as we import that energy backwards from the west across those transmission lines, it frees up an equivalent amount of transmission for more renewables like solar to be built in Oregon. Another huge opportunity that we are seeing come up in our regional energy modeling activities is renewable hydrogen. Basically, what we're seeing in our planning for resource adequacy is that as we retire things like coal and natural gas, we need to overbuild our renewables so that we can always have enough electricity to serve our needs, regardless of whether the sun is shining, the water is flowing, or the wind is blowing. When we do that, sometimes we have periods of time that our renewables aren't needed for our electricity grid. Renewable hydrogen is a beautiful opportunity to use those electrons to develop renewable hydrogen, which can completely unlock decarbonizing the long-term transportation sector, so long-haul trucking, and the maritime sector. It's also readily available to convert to all of those existing assets that we have that were designed to accommodate natural gas. The opportunities on Oregon's coast are that we have several coastal ports that could supply any of the myriad of services, whether it's shipbuilding, renewable hydrogen development, fabrication of parts, or service of the offshore wind industry. So we're interested in seeing what roles would they be, what are the impacts, and how can we line ourselves up to get into this economy responsibly. Naturally, there are potential barriers to offshore wind development. This is huge, huge, huge scale. Compatibility with other beneficial uses is the number one concern that we have here, specifically with our fishing industry, with our shippers, with our wildlife, which includes our coastal ecosystems, particularly around the ports as they are redeveloped to support the industry, and culturally. We also have some needs in long-term, high-voltage deep sea transmission planning if we are to get up and above that 2 to 3 gigawatts that we can handle on our Oregon coast. That's been driving a lot of our priorities as we've been engaging in state legislation. Some of those that we were watching and supporting that have passed: Regional Transmission Organization Study Bill, Resource Adequacy Authority at the PUC, the Renewable Hydrogen Study Bill, and our very own co-developed offshore wind planning bill. In Ways and Means, we also have the 100% clean energy bill that we were talking a little bit about. A particular interest to ocean and our mission is a $50 million community-based renewable energy fund that's included in there. This is really designed for solar plus storage microgrids. There's a requirement for a public or federally recognized tribe. There's a planning grant that can take up to 100% of the planning, up to $100,000. The construction grant, though, is up to 20 megawatts. That's a lot of power. And it can be up to 75% of the project cost. So this is very interesting. And as you might have heard in the chatter up front, as this bill still sits in Ways and Means, we are definitely supporting any moves in this bill to advocate for building in-state requirements. With respect to House Bill 3375, we did pass off of both the House and the Senate. So we now have established a goal of the state to plan for the development of up to 3 gigawatts of floating offshore wind in the federal waters. It also calls out the opportunity for 500 megawatts of renewable hydrogen, and specifically is looking for this maximizing of the benefits to the state while minimizing the conflicts between the wind, the energy, ocean ecosystems, and our ocean users. We had unanimous support off of the House floor, which is noteworthy because we have all of the coastal representatives supported this early planning. On the Senate just last week, we passed 22-8, and we were able to secure a really broad and very unique group of stakeholders, some previously unusual bedfellows, and wanted to thank those organizations for their support. So now we are really getting to the meat of today's discussion, which is in pursuing Ocean's vision of coexistence by design. How do we approach this development? And specifically today, we're talking about offshore wind through early stakeholder project design integration. In some of my conversations with members of industry, we were directed to the Xodus group as we're scratching our heads, how do we accomplish this? Who seems to be doing some wonderful work in other parts of the globe that we wanted to make sure those in this ocean group and out here in Oregon were aware of as a tool. So we invited them to present today, and I am going to turn it over to Jamie for that presentation.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Just confirming you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, that's great. Thank you very much for your warm introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here for Xodus Group. My name's Jamie MacDonald. I've been with Xodus for 10 years now. I moved to the US, Boston specifically, last August, and have been with Xodus for 10 years now. My background is in offshore marine construction, predominantly cable construction and installation, and I've been offshore executing on those projects myself in the past, so I have a good understanding of the physical infrastructure when it comes to executing on offshore wind. I'm going to share my screen in just shortly in a minute, but the agenda for my presentation is really to just give a really short overview of Xodus and our evolution in the renewables market, and how that's grown over time. Look at some floating wind, some of the unique aspects of deep water floating wind in particular, and what that means for interactions with coastal infrastructure, what that means for interactions with the ocean ecosystem and other ocean users. And a bit of some case studies that kind of demonstrate where it's been done, or how we're doing it, how it's been done historically, or how we're managing that collaboration of multiple interested parties of the ocean, and some examples of how we see where Oregon could take this in their next steps, and how we think an idea for progressing this early engagement in good faith with multiple stakeholders should be. Now, you might hear that I am not American. I am from Scotland. I can sometimes speak too quickly, so please, jump in at any time, ask me to repeat something. We need to wait to then, just jump in at any time. Let's share my screen.
While Jamie is sharing his screen, I apologize. I meant to do this at the beginning, and thanks, Chaz, for your example there in the chat. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat, if you're on this call, just let us know your name and the organization you're representing. That might help us to facilitate the discussion as Jamie moves forward.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can share this now. Can everyone see that okay? Excellent. You're not seeing the videos down the side like I am? You're just seeing the whole presentation? Okay. So Xodus Group was founded in 2005 out of the oil and gas industry. We're a true global energy consultancy. We have offices around the world, headquartered out of Aberdeen, UK, but offices in Glasgow and Edinburgh, London, Perth in Australia, Tokyo in Japan, Boston, and now Houston, and hopefully towards the end of 21, the west coast of the US. We really started in the Pentland Firth leasing round in 2008, where we were focused on tidal energy, and we were the company that executed on the environmental permitting of the world's largest tidal array project at the time. And that led us to 2014 to supporting the world's first marine energy to hydrogen project, which was done by EMEC, so the European Marine Energy Centre in Orkney, an island to the north of Scotland. In 2015, we supported Equinor with their stakeholder engagement and their environmental impact assessment for the Highwind Scotland floating wind project, so the first array scale floating wind project in the world at the time. We also supported on things like cable routing and mooring analysis, which is going to be very important when we're talking about Oregon, the deep water aspects of the Oregon bathymetry. Going forward to 2020, we came across and we established ourselves in the US offshore wind market, and we've been supporting the New Bedford Ocean cluster quite significantly, which is something I have a case study on nearer the end, which I think is a great example of what you're trying to achieve is here. And I think you're ahead of them in terms of your thinking ahead of the game prior to any even lease areas being defined. As we move to 2021 and beyond, one of the key things we're looking at is, and you've touched on it yourselves, is the integration of offshore wind and hydrogen. So we've just recently developed the policy for the Scottish government looking at offshore wind to green hydrogen, looking at the development scenarios of where that hydrogen is generated, how it's produced, and what the cost of that hydrogen is comparatively to traditional thermal generation, but also other battery storage and energy storage methods. So we're 350 people worldwide, and we kind of go by the three values. So we like to be involved in inspiring projects and inspiring groups, and feel like this project is certainly one of them. We like to be involved in unique projects from the outset, and we like to bring our imagination to the fore as well. So trying to use innovative ways, innovative techniques of solving the problems that are presented to us today in achieving a net zero environment. So how do we look at projects? And I think this is what makes us unique, is when thinking of these projects, we need to ensure that they're buildable. From a technical perspective, have an understanding that they are technically feasible, and they can be constructed with the correct port infrastructure, the right technology is selected, materials, etc. Also needs to be commercially viable. So the levelized cost of energy modeling, for example, modeling investment tax credits, we've recently done for the Offshore Wind California group, looking at if offshore wind development can achieve in California 3 gigawatts by 2025, or the planning of it, and the developers can meet their safe harbor requirements, the saving to the ratepayers could be anywhere between $5 and $8 billion. So I think that's something that also applies to Oregon. If you can do your 3 gigawatts by 2030, if you can get that progressed sufficiently over the coming year to a point where developers are willing to commit some capital expenditure, To meet the investment tax credit requirement, you could save the ratepayers anywhere in the region of 5 to 8 billion, depending on certain scenarios. So I think that's particularly important and useful context for driving forward policy in the state. And then finally, it has to be permittable. So from an environmental perspective, and this is more of what we're talking about today, is looking at the planning strategy, looking at making sure we're doing good stakeholder engagement in good faith early on and hearing concerns and making sure that those concerns are incorporated into design and are mitigated appropriately. So floating wind technology, the planning area for Oregon extends up to water depths of 1,300 meters, so greater than 4,000 feet. Nowhere in the world has deployed floating wind in water depths of that magnitude to date. So the US West Coast is going to be a hotbed for the testing and the deployment of technologies in that depth. So, it really brings a certain different dimension when considering how to permit these projects, the technological design of the moorings and the cables in a way that can be done so that it coexists with other sea users, in particular commercial fishing. Advantages of floating wind is that you can access that ultra deep water. So you can put these turbines further offshore and in a way mitigating some of the seascape, the landscape visual aspects of offshore wind, which some people aren't particular proponents of. Further offshore, often the better wind resource you get. And we've seen that here is where you further get offshore, you can be in up to 10 meters per second, which is an extremely strong wind resource. Considering places where the Gulf of Maine, for example, you're probably looking at between 8 and 9 meters per second. Can have quite a significant impact when you're looking at the energy produced by a farm when you're on the scales of 3 gigawatts. The construction method for these is very different as well. There's no need for expensive jackup vessels, and these are constructed and built at port and towed to site. So that in return also offers easier maintenance. You can tow these to port for major repairs rather than hiring expensive vessels. And the final point there, and perhaps not so much applicable to the West Coast, but maybe more for the Gulf of Mexico deep water, is that this allows for synergies with other industries, such as powering oil and gas assets. While not a key part of our energy future, so we can allow them to be more energy efficient and decarbonize their assets, then that's something that should be looked at. Some of the 3 technologies that have been deployed to date are detailed along the bottom here. You have the high wind spar, is the one developed off of Scotland. You have the semi-submersible PPI in the middle. And then on the left there, you have the ideal concrete barge style platform. Shannon, I can't see if anyone's asking questions. So if there's any questions that are coming, you want to ask them as we go, then please just jump in.
I
Question.
do have a question.
Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, the question I've got is, if I'm looking at a project that's being developed in Denmark right now, they're basically trying to develop a series, I'll call it a fairway, a power fairway, not only for the transmission lines, but also to stack together a series of projects, primarily wind, but they're also bringing in other aspects of it as well, like solar and different positions along the major transmission line. Isn't that a key component if we're going to be talking about strategy development and location of potential license rounds for the BOEM? Isn't that a key component in the studies that need to be done?
I would say so, yes, because it's a key problem for Europe, is that they've had these offshore wind farms developed, export cables land to shore, and saturating the grid in certain locations because we can't transport that grid easily up and down the coast on land. So you're talking about almost like a interconnector backbone offshore that allows for that integration of multiple resources and projects, the distribution of that power in a much more efficient manner.
To me, it's the same concept as you look at the Deepwater Gulf of Mexico with the gas infrastructure system that's there with the Independence Complex. I mean, that's out to 3,000, 4,000 feet, and the actual wellheads on the seafloor are 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 feet. So the concepts, again, from oil and gas applying to this, I think are design here, looking at the different spars, semi-sub, TLPs. Have you seen in your experience one particular design being favored over another? I know in the oil and gas sector, TLP is favored by certain companies like Royal Dutch Shell, but spars are preferred by other companies. But as a marine engineer, have you seen that one particular area, one particular design is more favorable to a sector, let's say like the Pacific coast, than others?
So what we've seen largely is this is very much driven by the water depth of these projects to date. So for a spar, you need to have the deep water port infrastructure in order to accommodate the draft of the development of a spar.
Right.
You need to have that in terms of the geographical aspects. You need to have that deep water draft ports to manufacture those. They're very popular. They've been in Norway. Built in Norway, they have the deep fjords that allow for that construction.
Right.
We haven't seen a lot of TLPs yet as a function of, they really are only suited to water depths, probably greater than 100 meters. Sorry, my conversion to feet isn't quite up to scratch yet, but so we haven't seen a lot of TLPs being deployed yet. We have seen that in deeper water for, like you say, Gulf of Mexico, those semi-subs. But equally, the TLPs are very challenging to install. The mooring configuration of a TLP is in the tension leg platforms, so you have to build a lot of redundancy into those systems.
Yes, it's very expensive. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, we're talking 15 megawatt, 18 megawatt turbines. The thrust of those turbines on those structures, all of that translates to bigger foundations on the seabed to accommodate those moorings. So today, I would say what we've seen the most common for is the semi-submersible design.
Right.
The one that three in from the right. It is with the buoyancy of the unit piercing the water with catenary mooring styles to the seabed. The mooring length diameter from the center there out to the center of the circle, as you would say, on the mooring diameter is probably 1.5 times the water depth, something like that.
For a spar, for the draft of vessels to support a spar, what type of water depth do the ports have to have? Is it in excess of 100 meters?
I don't think it would go as far as 100 meters, but you'd certainly, I think, probably need something in around the 50-meter mark.
Okay.
The challenge is you have to upend them.
Yes.
And then fill them with concrete to give you that lower center of gravity.
Right.
So that they obviously have this stability in the water. So
okay.
What we are seeing a move towards is the towers that are made for the turbines are obviously mass produced. So can we use the same dimension on steel requirement to generate turbine sizes? So we're talking more modular construction, and we're still seeing that through technologies such as Steesdal and Osergy, to name just two. So Osergy is the one deployed by Chevron Technology Ventures in the Mayflower Wind project.
Okay. I asked the question about the port. So as we see in the East Coast, battle between different areas initially on which areas would provide most of the support for the offshore wind projects from New York down to Maryland. And again, I'm asking the question really, how does the port facilities in Oregon compare to Northern California? And do we have an advantage that we need to continue to emphasize?
Yeah, I've got some good information on that, and I'll touch on that in a couple of slides time. But it's a good point, and I'll hopefully be able to explain your point there, and we can go through that then.
Jamie, there was a question also if you know anything about the resilience capacity, particular seismic resilience of those designs.
Seismic resilience will really come down to the type of foundation that you put in for the moorings. So it's going to come down to one of the three technologies. It's going to be either a drag anchor solution, which is as you would maybe perhaps see on a vessel anchor, but obviously a different scale. You would see a driven pile, which would be driven into the seabed, or you would see a suction pile, which would negatively displace create a vacuum within the pile, and it would obviously be sucked down into the seabed. And geotechnical and geophysical is not my area of expertise, but I imagine between those three, some would have different merits on being more suitable for seismic interaction, and a result of that would be liquefaction of the soil. So I imagine there will be a preference to which one is chosen. Which kind of wraps into this slide quite nicely in terms of what do we mean when we're talking about floating foundation selection. And there's a lot of things that go into choosing which foundation or which technology is going to be best suited for the site, the geography, and the region. So it all comes down to the site-specific constraints, so water depth, wave, current, and wind conditions. The geotechnical characteristics will drive how we are tethering that to the seabed. We'll be looking at project timeline. So some of these technologies are at technology readiness level 1 or 2 or 3, in that they haven't even deployed a scale model yet, and others are up at technology level 7, 8, and even 9, where they're commercially deployed. So that plays a part. Looking at supply chain availability as well. How easy is it to get supply of raw materials, particularly steel and/or concrete, and that can drive the fabrication method as well. Are we going to be fabricating these in, say, in Asia and transporting them across? Are we going to be doing modular fabrication of the component parts on the West Coast? So I think there's a lot of drivers here that still need figured out to understand the technology considerations. Environmentally wise, different anchor and mooring systems pose different permitting risks. Some have allowed for a smaller footprint. So a TLP will have a much smaller footprint in terms of its mooring spread than a catenary system will. So yeah, all these considerations need to be weighted appropriately. A lot of information needs to be collected before selecting a foundation type, and if there's any developers on the call, they will have done a lot of work already understanding which technologies are coming down the track, which ones they might consider investing in, and which ones are going to be most suitable for this site. So they will already be thinking about that. Now, Shannon, you've put me to shame because I found some maps, but there is clearly a great resource out there that BOEM have set up in terms of developing other maps. So excuse these less professional ones than you showed up, but there's lots of interactions that need to be considered when developing the project, and just even considering which sites should go up for as potential leasing areas. And this is something we did for Crime Estate Scotland, and when they are going through their Scotland process just now, we helped define 16 sites that were taken forward that the developers are bidding on, preparing bids for as we speak. So looking at all the different receptors at play. So first of all, like key interactions with other users of the sea, predominantly commercial fisheries, or recreational charter fisheries as well. Navigation restrictions on marine transportation, particularly important for floating wind due to the nature of needing to float these out to site, but also the wet storage aspect of they are going to be waiting to be either get their turbine integrated or waiting to be towed to site. So how does that interact with marine navigations? I think there's some positive aspects as well that where marine navigation can be take advantage of, perhaps port upgrades, etc. as a result of this. Existing cables, we have a lot of cables on the seabed. How does that relate to where the capacity is and on the grid, and what does that mean for large export cables coming in and joining the grid? Can be quite a congested area. There may not be the available landfall due to environmentally protected areas of natural beauty, for example, that may not lend itself to allowing cables to land where they would be most efficiently landed. There's obviously the Department of Defense use, which we've heard a lot of in California, and they've worked through quite a lot on getting to a conclusion on, or at least an agreement on. Cultural and historic uses and resources, traditional cultural properties, both onshore and offshore, including shipwrecks, ensuring that environmental justice communities are also considered. And we've seen that now a big part of the East Coast power purchase agreements, long-term contracts that have been coming out is in Massachusetts, just this most recent one, it's no longer solely determined on who has the lowest price of energy. 25% of the cost of the mark or the score will now go on how are you going to ensure historically disadvantaged communities or minority population groups, if they're part of communities that are adversely affected by environmental impacts, how are you going to, how is your project going to positively impact them? And so, example of trying to take of collaboration and how we work as one coastal community and bring that into the forefront of the thinking of the development of these projects. And this is, the first kind of, when I was talking about the port infrastructure here. So I guess the inset map there shows the marine traffic up and down on the west coast, and that little red box you see in the center is the enlarged picture you see there of the Port of Coos Bay. Now, I think the Port of Coos Bay has a significant opportunity. I believe, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, that there was meant to be an LNG facility built there that didn't get the go ahead. So there was a lot of planning put in place for the reinforcement or the redevelopment of land. There was a lot of thought had gone into the development of suitable wharfs and quaysides that could accommodate large vessels. So there's been a good bit of work done there that could be taken forward and used for floating offshore wind. You have a community that is now missing out on the jobs that LNG facility would provide, and this provides an alternative and a green alternative to those jobs, what those jobs would provide. The key thing is that there are going to have to be upgrades made. You need a significant amount of space to accommodate either the fabrication, assembly, or even just the marshalling of floating foundations. You're going to likely need to do increased dredging of the harbour entrance and channel to accommodate large vessels and the draft of the units. But I think it's got benefits as well. So it allows fewer delays for all vessels to enter the harbour as you have that increased depth. So people who benefit from that: commercial fishing, pleasure boaters, freight shippers, bulk carriers, for example. This new industry and the vessels coming in to support offshore wind increase vessel maintenance and repair facilities. Again, all your vessel holders in that port will benefit from that increased facilities. Offshore wind isn't built all year round. It is somewhat seasonal. So during that time, you're going to have increased port-related upland and warehouse storage space. From a workforce point of view, you will have an increase in labour workforce, fabrication, and heavy equipment, and other ports improvements as well. So all your transportation infrastructure supporting the port, rail or road, will all be improved as a result of that. From the research I've done here, I have seen that there was a really good comment from the fishermen involved in natural energy in relation to the PACWave project, and I just want to highlight this as something that's really encouraging to see, that people believe that renewables and fisheries and renewable energy can coexist and be mutually supported. So I think that is really nice and really encouraging to see that there is that support or potentially support there for the industry. The other receptors, and I think these were touched on, was Oregon seascapes, and this is unfortunately definitely not my area of expertise, but these will all be all the receptors that need to be considered when not just defining the areas that will be up for lease, but also the areas that will be the environmental impact statements that will need to be done for each individual project as they move through the permitting process. These are just some of the stakeholders that are out there. I think Shannon went through most of these, but everything from historic heritage, state historic office, land conservation, Department of Fish and Wildlife, environmental quality, utilities commissions, Coast Guard, Wildlife Service, BOEM, Department of Transport. There's a lot of stakeholders that have influence over the project, and the sooner they're engaged, the more likely it is. And I think that's what Shannon was great at saying at the start. Having that external involvement higher at the beginning, you have more chance of being successful. I just want to go through some case studies where we had some conflicts or interaction on some projects. First one was Highwind Scotland. You'll see the graph is probably quite small. The red dots are your turbines. Your black lines out are your mooring lines. And you have one of the biggest pipelines in the North Sea crossing it here in that blue line. which was the BP 40s oil pipeline. So the way they went about it was they did a full risk assessment. There was a potential risk to the pipeline from the turbine losing station and dragging anchors across the pipeline. There was a lot of meetings and risk assessments between Highwind and BP to find a solution for all. And ultimately, there was a separation distance between the project and the pipeline agreed. Furthermore, from a policy perspective, a rock dumping agreement was taken into place, and this ensured that prior to commencement, that the rock dumping over the pipeline was conducted to further protect that portion of the pipeline. So a bit of give and take between both parties, but they came to an amicable solution of how they could coexist. Current study that we're currently working on is for the European Subsea Cables Association. So drafting guidance for the proximity of offshore renewable installations to submarine cable infrastructures. So setting the standard for stakeholder consultation, guidelines for indicative separation distances, how to draft proximity agreements, and what is a process for a dispute resolution. So if they still can't get to it, what's the process that is commonly used by all to go through the problems. So successful collaborative exercise that we've gone through to develop this best practice approach and to minimize the project of future disputes, while being able to also maximize seabed development in a manner that is both safe and sustainable, which I think is really what we're trying to achieve early on as part of this working group, is getting that early open collaboration and engagement in good faith. So the guidance took in the consideration of all stakeholders. So, everybody that would have a use of that seabed area, making sure that what the solution was considered all stakeholders, not just the wind farm owners and the pipeline or the cable owners. So making sure that what the proposed solution is, or the proposed guideline is suitable for marine traffic, it's suitable for commercial fisheries and other users of the sea. And the third case study I want to speak about is the New Bedford Ocean cluster we're working on the here in Massachusetts, just about an hour's drive south of Boston. We have developed and helped set up the entity of the New Bedford Ocean cluster. So it's a 501c, and it's got three aspects to it. It has an offshore wind stream, it has a commercial fisheries stream, and it has a blue economy stream. And the purpose of it is to really foster collaboration and open and honest conversation between those three stakeholders, and ensure that at a regional, state, local, and individual level, we are pulling the strengths of each of those industries to the fore. We're making sure everybody gets the opportunities that are afforded to them, enabling skill sets and workforces in a new industry, and really trying to bring the community together around the development of offshore wind. So it's enabling and engaging with local organizations who have to be involved in the US wind sector, understanding that local business network and how they can be involved, understanding where the gaps are, and understanding what is required by the offshore wind industry and how we can bridge those gaps. And then see it serving as a clearinghouse for those businesses and organizations to interact. So Shannon sent me this through, and this was the 3375 3x30 offshore wind planning for Oregonians, and I just want to go through them one by one and give a little bit of thoughts. This is a significant challenge, connecting integrating 3 gigawatts worth of offshore wind into an electric grid by 2030. We've had this problem in Scotland. They're starting to feel this problem also on the east coast of the US. Further we can get ahead in our thinking on this issue, the better served you're going to be when developers are looking to integrate to the grid. Give them the confidence that there is a route to market for the energy they're creating, whether that be through straight generation to the grid or through green hydrogen generation, for example. Consulting with all entities, I think we spoke about that, and the stakeholders, to make sure everybody has their say, but particularly on jobs and equity, I think is an important one. This isn't additional energy we are creating for the state. This will be displacing some thermal generation that is being phased out over time, whether that's coal or gas, or perhaps even decommission nuclear. I'm not sure if that's in the state or not, but making sure that people who are adversely affected by the energy transition, it's done in a just way, that the jobs that are available to them now are available to them in the future through offshore wind. And we've identified that an offshore wind project takes 265 different job roles. So not total jobs, but job roles. So a variety of different types of jobs in the execution of a project.
Excuse me, Jamie, in your initial experience, or in your experience, did you reach out to the labor unions?
We have. So we've got a very good relationship with Blue Green Alliance, particularly on understanding what happens with the project labor agreements, where the jurisdiction lies, and what that means for who's covering what aspects of the fabrication or installation, to ensure that nothing is missed, to ensure that jurisdictionally no one thinks that another union is covering something and it gets missed altogether. So we've been working with the Blue Green Alliance and our shareholder, who is a heavy lift vessel owner, to understand what their strategy is for union labour, ensuring that they are providing adequate training. Rigging on onshore, for example, is very different to rigging and upending, a 100-meter monopile, for example. So they just working with them to help understand scale and the needs of offshore wind. So yes, we've done a little bit of work with them.
I was thinking more along the line of not only engaging, but looking for their support for offshore wind in the different coastal areas.
Yes, I've seen them, from what I've seen in engagement with some of the unions I've been with, very supportive, very keen to understand what they need to do with their workforce now, when they need to do it, what type of training they need to do in order to ensure that they can provide the services that they want to, especially now that obviously Vineyard Wind is moving forward. The appetite to ensure that they capture that market is definitely there. The hard part is translating that, saying this is the type of training you need, these are the type of certificates you need. Translating that to jobs is the next step we're in just now, and that will be the real measure of success, is can we translate that to those job training requirements to actual jobs. So what's our approach? And this is really what I'm here to kind of speak about today, but in our view, stakeholders not need to only agree to or recognize the value of sharing space or resources, but they need to actively, overtly examine and test how they can collaborate in order to leverage the benefits and productivity for all. So it's not just about agreement and being involved. You've got to really dive into this, understand the issues that underpin any conflicts and work towards what do we need to do as a group to mitigate or resolve these conflicts. So establish a list of industries which need to coexist and the key stakeholders for each of the industries. So is a working group required? Is this the type of group that brings this all together? Baseline the conflicts with offshore wind, the ocean ecosystem, and ocean users. And then establish a governance framework that identifies those impacts, enables commitment and capability from all those stakeholders to come together and ensure that how we progress through resolving or understanding how we can coexist is done in a managed way. And at the end of it, develop a shared vision and goals that serve to drive the sustainable engagement of a diverse set of stakeholders through the development of a project wind farm. So to ensure a shared understanding of priorities and issues, we would also identify, assess, and prioritize technologies, but also policies that can be used to respond to priority issues, and then communicate all that findings with all the parties. So it's a phased approach, understand and baseline the conflicts, get everyone to the table and ensure we have develop a shared vision of where we want to and how we want to implement co-design for coexistence, assess all the technologies and policies, identify new technologies that maybe need to be developed or policies that need to be developed, and then communicate this to the wider stakeholders. And at the end of the day, I think together we are greater than the sum of our parts. So if we don't do this together, we're not going to succeed. So let's work together to try and create a thriving coastal community for all. So that's my presentation. I hope it gave you something to think about, and happy to take any questions.
That was excellent. I'm kind of scrolling through the chat here to see, I think a few of these were covered on the fly. With respect to the comment about Blue Green Alliance and labor, we'll let you know that we have reached out to Blue Green Alliance as well as our Oregon-based labor, and they will be presenting at one of our upcoming webinars on specifically project labor agreements. What are they? How are they developed? How are they used? And then also another tool, which is community benefit agreements, which are not necessarily constricted to the labor aspects of a project, but can transcend that to reflect other community-based focuses or priorities.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Mike Graybill or Jamie Faraday, I know you had questions and raised hands earlier. Is there anything that you don't feel was addressed that you'd like to ask?
Sure. Hi, Jamie. My question was, what would be, if you've done any analysis on this, of the maximum distance to tow floating structures and their associated mooring devices from a land-based facility?
Some of the furthest sites we've seen on the east coast of Scotland are, greater than 50 kilometers away from shore. And that's the cable route itself. These steel structures are often towed 200, 250 kilometers on top of that. So what is the only thing that drives it is, the weather window you have to take it out to site, if you're going to make it in that window. So you need to do a pretty robust weather downtime analysis, and the maximum towing speed of towing that out, which probably is in around 5 knots at the moment. So for example, the UK just installed 5 10-megawatt turbines in the Kincardine project, and they towed them from Rotterdam in Holland. So significant distance. The moorings, now they can be taken from a different port altogether. You're probably going to more likely have a marshalling port for that type of ancillary technologies closer to the project. And you will do that from a different vessel. You'll probably do that. You will put those moorings perhaps down on the seabed and wet store them in advance of the turbine coming out. They're also looking at ways to have disconnectable turret buoys so that those moorings would be sitting on a buoy mid-water and they would just be pulled up into the structure in the future. So lots of innovative ways to get those connections going and more efficiently. And that will help for O&M and maintenance further down the line. When they drop them out, we'll be able to tow them back rather than disconnecting individual lines. So yeah, it's I mean, that being said, if we're manufacturing these floating structures in, say, Southeast Asia, saying somewhere like Korea or Japan, that's going to have to be a heavy transport vessel that takes out 2 or 3 at a time, takes them to somewhere like Coos Bay, wet stores them, and maybe get their turbines integrated there and then towed to site.
I see Business Network for Offshore Wind is on the line too, and we've been talking to them about the potential advantages of looking at the entire West Coast in terms of supply chain development and port infrastructure. Have you seen any integrated models like that, either in Europe or Asia or on the East Coast?
On the East Coast, we're certainly starting to see some clustering type effects. Certainly around the Port of New Bedford, Port of New London, Port of Providence, we're seeing a clustering of port capabilities there. Down in called the Mid-Atlantic, New York, New Jersey, we're certainly seeing some Windport, New Jersey, South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Some of these key ports are coming to the fore with the understanding that they're not going to be able to capture the whole of the market. So it needs collaboration. And once we start seeing that development, that's when we're starting to see the tier ones be like, okay, so your GEs, your Siemens, your foundation built freighters say, okay, we need to kind of coalesce around some of these clustered ports. And that's when your supply chain, your tier 2s, tier 3s really start building out from them. Until we have somewhere for them to kind of organically grow around. It was perhaps a bit disparate in the past few years. No one was really wanting to plant their flag, but now I think we're seeing people do a bit of flag planting up and down the East Coast, and I think we'll see quite a lot of that in the next few months. And then down in Virginia is probably the next cluster, Hampton Roads area.
With respect to that kind of emerging best practices or trial and errors, as you will, in the global sector, we will have Principal Power as our key presenters, either in July or August. We're waiting for them to confirm. And the title will be Lessons from Across the Pond. Basically, looking at how the technology and development community has been taking some of the outcomes of these collaborations with stakeholders to look for opportunities to maximize and multiply those benefits. I see that Whitney and Sarah from BOEM are both on the line. Did you have any updates or invitations for the group with respect to Oregon's planning process?
Hi, this is Whitney. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
No, you can't. Oh, you can. I don't have any specific updates for the group. I think, Shannon, you did a nice job capturing our efforts earlier. We hosted a couple of webinars last month, and all that information is available on our website at boem.gov/Oregon. And at those meetings, and again, you already announced it, is that we anticipate a task force meeting this fall to sort of reconvene the task force and present the results of our data gathering and outreach effort and all of the key data sets in Aura Wind Map, and then anticipate bringing the task force again shortly thereafter with a potential or draft call area prior to publishing a call for information nominations in the Federal Register. So certainly stay tuned, and if you would like to be on our listserv, we have you can sign up. I can put that in the chat, and stay tuned. Everything will be posted to our webpage.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to thank Jamie. Thank you so much for making the time and the excellent work that you're doing. We're really hoping that we can find some opportunities to engage you out here on the West Coast. Thanks to everyone for participating. And as always, if you have ideas for other topics that you feel that there's a gap that perhaps we can find somebody to let us know some more about, let us know. And we're always curating our next set of speakers. I will get this recording posted up through Alyssa on our website and send out the slide deck. I hope you all have a wonderful month, and perhaps we will see you in between now and then. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.